Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining the call today. My name is Macy, and I'm a nutrition educator at 3 Square, and we're doing this class with Sunrise Children's Foundation. I believe on your screen you are able to see the presentation guidelines. I'll go ahead and go over them now just in case. We will be keeping the microphones unmuted. This will allow for comments and discussion, and I really do hope for some participation throughout the class, so I welcome any questions you may have or comments as we go through the lesson. If we do find that there's too much background noise, Candace or myself will mute individuals or the entire group, and then we will either unmute to ask questions, or you can use the raising the hand feature on the right side panel of the GoToWebinar app. So we can make sure we still get your questions. And if for some reason you're not able to communicate the questions, feel free to use the chat box that's also in that right-hand panel, and I will try to address those as soon as I see them or within the lesson, if nothing else. And then we are recording this session for sharing purposes on different media channels, just so you all are aware. And we will go ahead and maybe give it another minute, but get started here soon. And I just want to thank you guys again for dialing into this virtual lesson. And so hopefully now you all can see my screen, starting with the first slide of this lesson. So like I said, I am a nutrition educator from 3 Square, and today's lesson is going to focus on the family kitchen. And so we'll be focusing on preparing quick and healthy snacks at home with your kids. And I'll also be sharing some tips on saving time and money.
Out there too. The lid should have been with it. Okay, maybe that's what the lids are.
And so like I mentioned before, we're going to try to keep everyone unmuted. So I definitely welcome any questions or comments you may have on the lesson. If we start to have too much background noise, we will mute either everyone or a few individuals, and then we'll just unmute when you have questions or comments. But to get started and to practice kind of the communicating virtually, I'd love to get to know each other. If you wouldn't mind, some of you or all of you sharing maybe what age your kids are and or what you're looking forward to learning in this lesson.
Hi, Macy. This is Alicia. I'm a dietitian at a WIC location, a couple of them. And so obviously we're always balancing questions from families from any range of kids, 0 to 5 mainly, but also even up to the teenage years. Because,
Great, thank you for sharing. And this lesson in particular actually has tips for all age groups, but we do primarily focus on ages 0 to 5. So hopefully this will be helpful. And if any other comments or questions.
I have a boring life.
How old?
And my older sisters, they go party. I just stay home. I have a boring life. So no, sir. No fashion. That's my life. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
Hi, my son and my daughter, they're under 5. My daughter is 1.5. My son is 20, and my kids, they go to Pillsbury School. And I usually cook at home for them, lots of seasoning, and sometimes they like snacks. I'm not buying any fast food stuff or any snacks from the store. Usually what I give them as a snack is either berries or nuts. That's what they have for a snack.
Great, thank you for sharing. And we'll actually be touching on a few different snack ideas, so maybe that will give you some new ideas. But I appreciate everyone who has shared. And like I said, as we continue through this lesson, if any questions or comments come up, please feel free to jump in and say your question or use the chat box feature if you're not able to speak or if there's a lot of noise happening around you. And so as we go through this lesson, of course, feeding our family can be very challenging at times, and
The
feeding
one.
young children can be especially challenging.
Is that
But the key messages for today's lesson will be how we can make our jobs as parents easier or as caregivers easier, as kids are more likely to try new foods when they help choose and prepare the foods. We'll also think about ways that kids can help in the kitchen as early as in their toddler years and how this involvement helps motivate them to try new things. And then the main message of today is staying calm and continue to cooking and working with kids in the kitchen. Even though it may be messy, the more that we practice, the better we'll get at figuring out what kitchen jobs are right for both ourselves, but then also our kids, and start to integrate a new rhythm of having our kids help us more in the kitchen, which can increase their buy-in to trying new foods. And so first, we're actually going to start with a recipe video that is from Cooking Matters, who is the organizer of this lesson plan. This recipe is a fruit tart, and so I'm just going to switch my screen here. And so as we watch this, I'd love for you all to think of maybe which ways your kids could help put together this type of snack or dessert. And the nice thing about a recipe like this is it's actually pretty flexible, more like a framework rather than something strict that you have to follow. So you, of course, could make easy swaps as to what you have on hand, whatever berries or whatever things work for your family. But this is a good way to start having our kids maybe help us in the kitchen and put together snacks that they're interested in trying. And so based on that recipe, I'm curious if there are any steps that maybe your kids could help you with.
Small children could use plastic knives to cut up the soft fruit.
Definitely. And having plastic knives or kid-friendly knives in your kitchens is a really good way as they're more approaching the toddler and then growing up a little bit more, but having them practice kind of the motor skills necessary while, of course, still being protected, as plastic knives aren't nearly as sharp. And fruit is an easy food that you can cut with the plastic knife since it's pretty soft already. And then if you didn't have a rolling pin for the bread for the tarts, you could always have your kids just smash it down with their hands. We've actually done that when we've taught these classes in person, and it's pretty interactive and fun. So that's a good way to also have them get involved and have kind of a sensory input of using their hands to smash down the bread before it goes into the oven. And then the other thing about this recipe, like I mentioned when the video was playing, is it's really more of a guideline or framework rather than something strict that you have to follow. So if you only had yogurt and not cream cheese, you could put yogurt on the base of your fruit tart and still put fruit on top. But this could be a good way to maybe increase some of the nutrients that your kids are getting during snack time by using whole wheat bread, maybe some yogurt for protein and a dairy source of calcium, and then some fruits that maybe they're familiar with or wanting to try. And this way they can both be interactive in the kitchen and then also excited to try this new food item because they participated and it's fun and creative and they are able to decorate it however they want. And then the next video will be a smoothie video, which doesn't necessarily need a recipe, but it's still a good idea to walk through. Having it be a sweet either snack or breakfast item. So that can be a really great addition to kind of what's already being made during the week. And then similarly, when engaging our kids, this is an easy item where you just kind of dump everything in the blender. So I know when I've taught this class in person, it's been quite interactive having kids help us build the smoothies, add the items in, and then even turning on the blender, while it may seem small to us, is actually pretty interactive. And because the blender is kind of an exciting kitchen tool that's pretty safe to use as it's just an on and off switch, it's a great way to have them start helping in the kitchen without making too much of a mess since it's pretty contained in the blender itself. And then the last recipe I have here is for mini pizzas. And all of these recipes can actually be found in the handouts portion on the right side panel of the GoToWebinar application. We have a recipe handout packet and then also a different handout packet with some additional information. But the nice thing about making mini pizzas is, again, it's a framework that can be used to fit your home and your family's taste buds. And when I've taught this class in person and used this recipe, we've used things like whole wheat English muffins, whole wheat mini bagels or full-size bagels. And you could even use things like naan bread, pita, or real pizza dough if you had it. But using a whole wheat dough increases the fiber and some of the vitamins, while also making it a fun meal to put together with your kids. And we always try to get some veggies on the pizza topping. So having it be a familiar food like pizza is a good way to maybe introduce one new veggie if you also pair it with something you know your kids like pepperoni or cheese. And another tip we usually give is if there's any hesitation to putting veggies on the pizza, you can always add some grated carrots into the tomato sauce, because the red conceals the carrot color. And because it's grated, you almost can't taste it, but it's another little boost of vitamins and nutrients by adding the carrots into the tomatoes. And then finally, this recipe is great for including our kids because not only is it pretty hands-on, but it's also very personable. So you're able to create the pizza you want, which can actually help in reducing food waste. If you're using English muffins, you maybe only need to pull out 2 out of the pack of 6 rather than using all of them. And so if for some reason tastes change in between making the meal and eating the meal, you're not having to throw away a lot of food. And at the same time, it's pretty customizable. So you could have one English muffin with a new vegetable, and then the other half of the English muffin with just sauce, cheese, and pepperoni, which can create a little bit more of a buy-in into trying the unfamiliar ingredients. But I can vouch for this recipe. It is usually a pretty big hit in the classes that we've taught in person for most ages. So I do think it's a good one to start including our kids, as it's not super messy, but it also is a great way to maybe diversify what we're eating at home while still increasing the nutrients that we're getting in a day-to-day basis.
Macy, I had to mute the group because there was a lot of background noise, so I would recommend that if there's any questions, people raise their hands or put it in the chat window.
Sounds good. And I definitely, if anyone has questions, whether it's about the slide I'm on or something that has maybe come up at home related to what we're talking about, I'm happy to answer them or do my best to answer them. So please don't hesitate to either unmute yourself to ask some questions, or if you do have the raising your hand feature or using the chat box. And so this slide talks about some different snack ideas, which could be helpful if you are finding that your kids are wanting more snacks throughout the day. It's pretty standard as our kids continue to grow that they want smaller meals throughout the day, just because their stomachs are small, but they're still growing, so they might seem hungrier than adults who can usually get by with just 3 meals a day. And so this snack handout is also in the recipe handout. But these are good, quick options that, again, could be put together with your kids or even put together at the beginning of the week to have on hand for the rest of the week. And so based off of these, what you guys see on the slide, I'm curious if any of these maybe your kids would like, or if you already make something similar in your homes already. And again, you are on mute, so if you do want to comment, or if any of these you think your kids would like, just make sure to unmute yourself so I can hear you. For my classes, we have made the banana crunch, and then we've also made, of course, smoothies and then fruit kebabs, and all of those are
Macy, can you check your audio? I think you dropped off.
Yes, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I'm sorry about that. But just continuing then, in some of the classes I've taught, we have done banana crunch, which is using banana, granola, and then a whole wheat graham cracker. And that's been a good snack because it's pretty interactive, having kids mash very ripe bananas, which again is pretty easy to do when they're super ripe because they're so soft. And then spreading it on the graham crackers can get a little messy, but as long as you're prepared to potentially have a messy kitchen, it's worth it to have our kids involved, just because it helps with them buy into trying something new. And the nice thing about banana crunch is it's pretty texturally different. So I know sometimes with certain foods, kids can be a little hesitant to try something because of texture. So figuring out what works for your family makes it a little bit easier to introduce new snacks. And in banana crunch, you use granola for the crunch. So that's a nice way to offset kind of that creamy, soft mashed banana. And then with fruit kebabs, again, using plastic knives to either cut the fruit into fun shapes, or you could even use things like cookie cutters to cut the fruit, and then sticking it on sticks or skewers is a good way to, again, kind of have that sensory input for our kids, so they're participating in creating the snack, which might increase their interest in trying one of the new fruits that you're serving on the kebab. And so I'm curious again how you all maybe already involve your kids in the kitchen, or how you feel about having them involved in the kitchen. Some suggestions on this slide are having our kids scrub and peel vegetables, cracking eggs, and maybe even just helping gather ingredients. So I'm curious if anyone currently has their kids helping them do that at home now.
Yes, my 4-year-old likes to help crack eggs and add salt and pepper and things like that to dishes.
And that's great involvement. I know cracking eggs, sometimes people might be a little hesitant because it can be messy, but I think that's a really great task for developing motor skills. And you can always crack the egg in a separate bowl, just in case there are any shells that get into the egg. So then you can separate the shells before you add it to the main bowl. But thank you for sharing, because I think those are all great tasks that are pretty minor, but they really do engage our children and just increase their knowledge of what's going on in the kitchen, but then also their interest in eating whatever you're making.
Macy, we have quite a few. Valerie says that her children help out every day. Elise said that she has the grandkids do the prep work. They love it.
Oh,
And
that's great.
Michelle says, I let my granddaughter help all the time. She loves to be hands-on.
That's great. So I appreciate all of you guys sharing. And it sounds like then a good number of you, or at least a good few of you, do have your kids or grandchildren involved. And I think it goes very far in their development, even if they're doing small tasks like adding seasonings or just gathering ingredients. Having that involvement in the kitchen does start to just build a little more awareness of what's going on, and having more knowledge about food preparation, of course, is helpful. As we get older, it's a great skill to know how to cook. And I know personally, my experience in the kitchen as a child has definitely formed how I am in the kitchen now. And the other great thing about cooking and eating together in this way is it does promote positive eating habits for the whole family. It also teaches our children responsibility and builds self-confidence, which will make mealtime more fun. Like I've mentioned a couple times now, the more that we have our kids help, especially with unfamiliar things, it does help with the buy-in to try new foods. So this can ultimately make mealtime a little less stressful. If you know that your kids were very excited and interested to help put the meal together, they're probably going to be more excited to try the item if it is a new item. And of course, this is within what works for your home and your time, as I know we're all very busy. And sometimes having our kids in the kitchen does increase the messes that we make. So doing this when it is most appropriate for the household is the best way to do it, just so it can remain low stress and still enjoyable for everyone.
Macy, we have a hand raised from Ani. Ani, if you want to go ahead
yep.
and
Hi, my son helps me. He's a 3.5, and he helps me with cracking eggs. And also my daughter and my son, I'm making every day in the morning banana shakes with milk, banana, and oats. And they're helping me to put the banana inside the shake and just turn the shaker on. And that's what they do. They try to be involved, and sometimes I give as a snack. I make a spread from avocado, and they like the avocado spread on the bread. And they just bring me the avocado straight from the fridge and just ask me to make it for them. So that's how involved they are in food preparation on the small things, not the big ones.
Thank you very much for sharing. And that avocado snack actually sounds similar to one of the snacks that was on that snack page. I think it's called Avocado Crunch, but it's basically mashed avocado on bread or crackers. And that is really highlights how kind of engaging our children at a young age will make them more interested in maybe trying different fruits or vegetables that they maybe would be hesitant towards if they weren't involved in the cooking process. And also having those fruits and vegetables readily available makes it a bit easier for our kids to turn to them for a snack if that's always what they see around the house or what they see us eating, as it's easier to have good habits when we see our parents doing it, which I'll get into a little bit later in the lesson. And so this handout, or this screen, is in our handouts that's attached to the webinar. And so this will give you some ideas of what kids can do in the kitchen based on their age. And again, this is flexible. If our kids have been in the kitchen since a very young age, they may be able to take on more tasks or responsibilities sooner, just because they've developed more of that confidence and some of those motor skills. But it'll range from things like rinsing and scrubbing fresh produce to cracking eggs, like we've talked about. And then as they do start to get older, they can even begin maybe picking out recipes or doing all the prep for a recipe. And as they get into the teenage years, depending on their comfortability and your comfortability with them in the kitchen more independently, they could start to use electrical tools, opening cans, and then maybe even putting together the majority of a meal, and maybe you coming in to help when dealing with maybe boiling water or the oven or things like that. But the nice thing about a framework like this is it shows the progression and also highlights how the younger that we get our kids engaged in the kitchen, the more we can build on it. And so, of course, if maybe our kids are 6 or 7 and they haven't been in the kitchen yet, it's fine to start them with some of the tasks that are maybe a little younger until they get more comfortable. But the great thing about cooking is it really is a skill and a habit. So the more that they do certain tasks, the more confident they'll become, and maybe the less stressful it will be for you because your kitchen won't be as messy. And another great component of having our kids help in the kitchen is they can always help clean up too, which teaches great responsibility, but also helps reduce the mess that we might make as we're cooking these family meals. And so moving into how we're eating around our kids, and I touched on this briefly, but again, these questions on the slide, I'd love for this to be a discussion if anyone has any input or thoughts on this. But I'm curious what it means to all of you to be a good role model for our kids when it comes to healthy eating. Or if anyone has any habits at home that they maybe are new or they've realized are these healthy habits that they are passing on to their kids. And I have a few examples too, but if anyone wants to share, I definitely welcome that.
Sorry, it's again me. So I usually fill my fridge with berries and fruits, and they have milk constantly. They have milk, so those are the things that they actually gravitate towards. So when they want to eat something or snack on it, they just grab a berry or a fruit, or ask me to wash it or cut it for them. And that's what I have that's available. I don't keep chips or other type of snacks at home or available for them to get it. And the other thing that I have is nuts. Sometimes I just buy nuts without any salt, without any sugar, just regular raw nuts. And when they want something, I just give it to them as a snack. That's all I have for them as a habit. And I don't eat it as well. So I don't eat chips at home. Even if I want to eat chips or something, I probably will buy it like when they're not home, and I'll just eat it so they won't see me eating that food at home.
Right, and thank you for sharing. You brought up a couple good points. That being that what we have available, of course, is what our kids see and what they gravitate towards. And of course, when we're filling our fridge and our pantry, there are so many factors that go into it, whether it's our grocery shopping budget or how much time we have to prepare maybe fresh snacks versus snacks that are already made. But I think the important thing really is just thinking about ways, whether they're big or small, that we can encourage healthy eating. So if sometimes we're having packaged snacks, but then other times we're having carrot sticks or celery with peanut butter, it's really about just finding the balance that works for our family, also what our kids like to eat, and then of course our budget. Everyone is shopping with different grocery store budgets, and I know especially with the public health situation at hand, some things have maybe even changed. So I think the important thing about thinking about healthy eating habits for our kids is it's definitely not all or nothing. So even if it's just you start having a few more maybe fruits and vegetables in the fridge, like I said, carrot sticks or celery, having that around and then you eating it yourself will definitely increase your kids' interest in eating it, and then also maybe kind of start to move the needle so they tend more towards for those fresh snacks rather than packaged goods. And another behavior that may seem small but actually does make a big difference is what we're drinking throughout the day. So when we're at home with our kids, if we're drinking more water or soda or other sugary drinks, but our beverages actually may seem minor throughout the day, but it does last an imprint on our children. So choosing to have water or less sugary juices rather than soda is a really big and impactful way to be a positive role model. And that's really a pretty small change that doesn't require kind of redoing your whole pantry or your whole fridge. But I know when I've taught this class in person, a lot of times I'll have parents say, maybe they have a hard time getting their kids to drink water, and they realize that they also don't drink a lot of water because they didn't grow up drinking water. So it's kind of like a chain. So that's a small one that maybe seems minor, but actually does have a great influence in how our kids think about what they want to drink. And of course, water's so good for us that we should all be drinking it all the time. And then the other kind of tip we have for modeling healthy behavior is thinking about how we build our plates at meal times or even snack times. So really trying to fill about half the plate with fruits or veggies is a good way to signal to our children having a balanced meal. Most of this nutrition information comes from the USDA My Plate, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with that graphic, but if you look at it online after this class or in your free time, it's primarily vegetables on your plate and then protein and some grains. And so if we think about how we build each meal, that's another small way to maybe start influencing our kids to tend more towards eating vegetables or being a little more open-minded to vegetables rather than avoiding them altogether or wanting some of the unhealthier options. But again, it's really just about finding balance rather than having it be all or nothing. And then, of course, on the flip side, there may be behaviors that are unhelpful that we're modeling, whether it's behaviors or attitude towards food. And so I know one thing that's pretty common, it's come up in conversation and even in my own family, the idea that you have to finish all the food on your plate to leave the dinner table. And I know I personally have 3 younger cousins, and that's how their parents kind of communicate eating to them, is that all the food has to be finished. And I think now as we're kind of learning more about childhood eating and development and things around that, it's being discussed that maybe that's not the best way to communicate attitudes towards food. So instead, trying to instill an ability to read your hunger cues. And this might mean that some days our kids eat a lot of food and other days our kids don't eat the same amount of food, and that's okay. But I know through Cooking Matters, we're really trying to kind of open up the idea that all the food has to be finished on the plate, and instead try to have our kids start understanding when they're hungry and when they're full. And then as parents, understanding that every day that might look a little bit different, but that's okay. And then the final unhelpful behavior that we sometimes see that's important to note here is, I think it's common for adults to do this, but that's skipping meals or maybe feeling hungry, but just drinking water or chewing gum instead of eating. And that might seem pretty minor, but our kids really do pick up on so many behaviors and things. And so when we are feeling hungry and maybe not wanting to eat because it's not dinner time yet, instead of skipping the meal or ignoring the hunger, trying to have a small snack or something like that, again, emphasizes listening to our hunger cues, which then turns it into a positive behavior for our kids to observe. Because really, most things they learn about food come from us, and that can be good or bad. So recognizing maybe what's a little less helpful and then turning it into a helpful behavior, like choosing veggies and maybe a dip for a snack instead of not eating when we're hungry. And so again, this page will be found in the attached handout, but these are some other tips of how to be a healthy, or how to set healthy eating habits for our kids. And then at the bottom, you'll also see questions that you can ask during mealtime. And so outside of just eating, mealtime is also, of course, a great time to sit down with either our kids or our whole family and just have conversations that also then increase the attitude around meal times. And of course, this might not be feasible for every family every single day, but just really engaging our children beyond making them eat the food that's served to them is a good way to have a positive attitude around dinner time or any other meal, really. And then especially if there's something new on the plate that may be unfamiliar or they may be hesitant to try, having more of a positive environment can also make them more likely to want to try the food or maybe even like the food because it's not as stressful to finish all the food that's on their plate. And so looking at the prompt on this slide, and I'll read it out too, but again, great for discussion if anyone has any thoughts on this, but how would it make you feel if I told you that you had to eat a certain food or I gave you only one pre-made option to eat? And so this question is really thinking about when we are serving our kids, if we just put the meal on in front of them without giving them any idea of what's in the food. And so as adults, and I think I can speak for most of us, but typically when we order something at a restaurant, we know what the food items are, or we know what questions to ask to decide if we want that food item. And we rarely probably would order something where we don't completely understand what all the ingredients are. And so when thinking about this and then thinking about feeding our children, sometimes we may be asking them to, or even expecting them to eat foods where they don't understand what it is on the plate. And they might not necessarily know what questions to ask to better understand what's on the plate. And so another great thing about sitting down for meal times or having asking questions and speaking more around food is giving them the opportunity to ask questions about what they're eating. And so if they're maybe helping you in the kitchen, they may ask what a certain ingredient is, or they may even taste it before it goes into the final dish. Like if you were, let's say, using bell peppers to make a final meal, they might taste it raw and then taste it again cooked. But I think this is another thing to think about when we do find resistance in the kitchen or our kids aren't as excited or interested to try new foods, is it could very well just be that they don't really know what's on the plate, and not knowing makes them apprehensive to trying. I know personally, I probably wouldn't order something off a restaurant menu if I had no idea what every item was, or if I just had to pick based on pictures. So we definitely encourage having discussions around the food that's being served and allowing our kids to ask any questions if they have any about the ingredients or if they want to taste anything separately. This also can ultimately save you time and money, because if you have that kind of open dialogue and they are more interested in trying the food, you'll potentially have to throw less away at the end of the meal because they'll be excited to eat it rather than hesitant the whole time. And so again, this question, I'm definitely interested in having a discussion, or if you have any thoughts, maybe this has happened in your household or maybe how you handle it, but how might you react if you involve your children in the food preparation and they still don't eat the food? So for those of you that do have your kids or grandkids help, has this happened to you, or have you prepared a meal what they don't want to eat? And I guess, how did you handle that? And no worries if no one wants to share. Maybe this hasn't happened yet, but it may happen as you start to put some of these new practices in place.
It actually happened to me quite sometimes, because my son had a really good appetite when he was a kid, a really small baby, and then over time he just developed some kind of taste, or actually it's just changing. He's just picky eater. He just doesn't want to eat specific food, or it just changed over time constantly. And so he would be excited to make the food with me, but eventually he won't eat. So I'm just letting it be, you know, like I'm trying a couple of times, I'm just asking multiple times, and if he just doesn't want to do it, just that's okay. And then next time he will do, like, and it actually did, like a couple times we made eggs together and he didn't eat, but recently he started eating that egg, you know. So it just the trial and error, especially with these small kids, they change over to every day, you know. So it's a matter of patience, I think.
Absolutely, and thank you for sharing. And you did touch on some key points. The first being, it's completely normal if at first our kids, as they're or when they're younger, are very interested and excited to try new foods, and they might eat everything you put in front of them. And then as they start to grow up and age, they may start disliking foods they once liked. They may become even pickier, even though they were very adventurous when they were younger, and that's totally normal. And I think you brought up a great point that the best way to kind of get through that period is to just keep trying and, of course, practice a lot of patience, which is, of course, easier said than done. But the patience and then the just trying again or maybe trying in different ways is a good way to keep introducing the food without a lot of pressure. And so having certain meals where maybe the thing that they're hesitant to eat. So let's say maybe they don't love carrots. Carrots are on the side rather than throughout the whole meal, so you don't end up wasting a lot of food. Because of course it's also frustrating if you make a big dinner and then our kids don't want to eat it because today they decide they don't like a certain ingredient. So finding that balance between patience but still trying multiple times and not having too much pressure on the eating of the food.
Macy, we had a comment in the question saying we always give the kids a choice, so it appears they have a say in what they're eating. An example is I'd ask them if they would like broccoli or green beans tonight. Even if they don't want to eat their veggies, they'll eat them because it was their choice.
That's another great tip. So thank you for writing that in and thank you for sharing that, Candace. But that is another really great way to, again, have our kids have that buy-in. So even if they're not helping cooking, if they're helping pick an ingredient or you give them a couple choices like this example between broccoli and green beans, the comment mentioned, even if they're not super excited to eat broccoli, they're more likely to eat it because they chose it on that meal, for that meal. And that then reduces stress for you because you can go into cooking feeling like, okay, they're probably going to eat the broccoli since they chose it. And that even goes back to this idea that our kids are probably more likely to try items if they know what they are. So just having the discussions and conversations around what certain vegetables are, or really identifying the vegetables and fruits they like, make it a little bit easier to start to put together meals without feeling like you're always wasting food or having meal times become very stressful, because that's not fun for anyone involved or anyone in the household when it starts to become a lot of stress around trying to make sure everyone's eating and enjoying the foods. So giving choices is a great example. And then again, being kind of persistent, but also patient. And then a few other tips we have is allowing our children to serve themselves. So similar to allowing them to have a say in what's being served, allowing them to serve themselves respects their independence and it makes them feel like they're in control, even if you are deciding what is being served for that meal. And if they feel like they have the choice, they're more willing to try something like the broccoli and green bean example, or even like the fruit tarts or mini pizzas. Having the independence to create something or build their own plate increases their interest in trying something, especially if it includes a new item or maybe a vegetable they're not crazy about. And then also having our children taste test the components of the meal instead of offering everything at once. So this may look like maybe the family's having a taco night, and instead of just building tacos for our kids, having a plate that has all of the components. So maybe a little bit of chicken, a little bit of beans, some bell peppers and onions, but kind of separated so they can taste it individually and then decide if they want to mix it together or keep eating it that way. But this way you're not making multiple meals through the night. You're still using the same components you are serving yourself, But again, it's reducing the chance of you having to throw away a lot of food because your kids didn't really eat it and just maybe touched it and moved it around, but didn't enjoy it. And then the last tip is making sure that we always have a food that you know the child or that your child will like in the meal. Ideally, this would be a healthy option. So maybe knowing that they like, let's say, broccoli, and then introducing a new vegetable like carrots. So if nothing else, they can fall back on that vegetable or fruit that they really like while also trying something new. And that's the nice thing, again, with that mini pizza idea is you can pair it with things you know your children will like, whether that was in that instance cheese and pepperoni, but then also adding spinach or bell peppers to just start to introduce new flavors and items to them without having everything be new when there's more hesitation than because it's all too unfamiliar. And then finally, what the whole lesson has been about is just involving them in the process. And this can even start at the grocery store. I know some families often will, if the budget allows, will, when they take their kids to the store, let them pick out one item in the produce section. And then together, parent or grandparent and child or grandchild will put together a meal around that item. And whether it's successful or not, the involvement from shopping to cooking does seem to increase buy-in for trying the item. So even if it was picking out something like an eggplant that maybe they've never seen before but love the color, increases their interest in trying it, which even if it's not successful, they're more likely to try it and maybe even continue eating it just because they felt that they were involved in the whole process. And then again, that continues to the cooking, the gathering, the ingredients, even setting the table or helping clean up. All those small tasks around food are great ways to increase their buy-in and their interest in the meal. So then summarizing today's lesson, the main goal of really involving our kids in the kitchen is to make the overall job easier. So of course, having our kids in the kitchen, it might be a little bit messier. It might cause us to use a few more ingredients than we wanted to because we want more opportunity for them to do certain tasks. But they are more likely to try the foods, and they're more likely to buy into eating new foods when they are involved. So that mess can sometimes be offset with knowing that they're still eating a nutritious meal and they're excited to eat whatever you're serving that day. The next one is starting young. So based off of that page that I shared earlier that is in the handout, we can start involving our kids as young as 2 years old. And if your kids are older or your grandchildren are older now, it's never too late to have them involved. There's definitely different tasks for every age group, but having them involved increases their independence, increases their interest in wanting to cook, which is a great skill to have later on, of course. And then again, in the moment, it just makes it a little bit easier for you to know that they're going to be interested in eating the food you're making. And then the last tip, which I'm sure resonates with everyone, is it of course can be stressful having them in the kitchen. Meal times can be stressful in general, but really just trying to stay calm and then also stay patient. Viewing having our kids in the kitchen as an opportunity to spend time with them rather than maybe a chore that you need to get dinner on the table is another good way to think about involving our kids and maybe having it be a bit more enjoyable and having a positive experience. But of course, we want to think about how this involvement fits into our everyday schedule. So if Monday through Friday you're super busy with work, it maybe doesn't make sense to also involve our kids and then have a big cleanup in the kitchen. But even a few meals on the weekend can make a difference and just start to increase kind of their independence and also their buy-in to trying new foods. And the best way I would suggest kind of integrating some of these in our daily life or in our daily kitchens is by starting to set a small goal and then work from there. So maybe choosing one new thing you'd like to try this week, keep that up until it's an easy habit, and that could take weeks or even months. And then from there, you'll pick another new thing you want to try. So maybe that looks like starting by just having our kids in the kitchen while we're cooking and talking to them, but not yet having them involved because we're worried about the mess, or maybe they're just a little too young. but still starting to talk about the ingredients we're using or what we're eating for dinner that night. And then as you progress, they can start to help with gathering ingredients, adding spices, or different tasks that seem appropriate for their age. But again, like I mentioned earlier, it's not all or nothing, and it doesn't have to be every single day they're helping, but whatever works best for your family and your schedule. But just that increased involvement hopefully will eventually reduce stress around making sure they're eating healthy meals. And then the last reminder that we have is to remember that setbacks will happen, and that's absolutely okay. Like we were talking about earlier, it's totally normal for our kids to be super excited about all foods and want to try everything and love everything. And then it feels like weeks later, they don't want to eat anything they were eating the few weeks prior. And so that's totally normal and okay. And as long as we can expect that to happen and have patience to handle it, it will just help continue to grow in the kitchen. And so one small habit is a good way to avoid large setbacks that eventually make you not want to cook at all in the kitchen. So choosing small goals, and then as setbacks happen, just understanding that it's okay and it is part of the process. But once you start or set a new habit, it's easier and faster to get back on track the next time. So every time there's a setback, it'll be just a little bit easier to get back on track for that goal. And having patience, again, I know it's easier said than done, but patience will go a long way when involving our kids in the kitchen and feeding our picky eaters, which I'm sure all of you already experience and are great with your patience. So hopefully that's something that you are familiar with, but setbacks are okay. And it doesn't mean anything's going wrong. It's just a process. But as they get older, you'll probably start to see the development and their interest in cooking, which is a great skill, like I've said many times, to have as you grow up. And so just finally, from the Cooking Matters side, like I've mentioned, there's 2 handouts attached to this webinar. One is a recipe packet, and one is a handout packet that has most of the slides that were presented today in this PowerPoint, as well as a few other resources. And then the Cooking Matters app is also another resource that you can download on your phone that has recipes similar to the ones I showed today on the YouTube videos and in the handout. And then there's also a Cooking Matters website, which is great because you can put in maybe ingredients you have and it will come up with search results that are different ways you can use it, especially if you are feeling like you're in a recipe rut because you're cooking so much at home and maybe eating more at home than you were before. So when cooking can start to feel kind of boring or monotonous, it can be fun to look at new recipes and try new things, or even involving your kids to look through that website with you and seeing maybe what they want to make or want to eat, and then where they can help you. And then the last set of resources is the Cooking Matters Facebook page, which has a lot of activities, and they do Facebook Lives and things like that. But these are really just ways that you can keep cooking in the kitchen and having it be fun, as I know when we're cooking every day, it can start to feel kind of tedious. So different ways we can make it fun, and involving our kids is always a fun way, just because it's new hands in the kitchen that can help you do things, but it's also a bonding opportunity and a great teaching opportunity as well. And so I know we're done a few minutes early. I'm not sure if anyone has any questions about the lesson or about, I guess, food or nutrition in general, but I'm happy to answer them, or if anyone has any comments, please feel free to share. We do have a survey that will only take about 5 to 6 minutes, and it's a internet link that Candace will send out in the chat feature, but it just gathers your feedback on the lesson. So if you don't mind filling it out, it's really helpful for Cooking Matters, just so we can make sure the content and information we're providing is as useful to parents, caregivers, grandparents as possible. And as you'll see on the screen, the project code is 000000, so 6 zeros. But again, if anyone has any other questions, I'm happy to answer or happy to stay on until 2:30, but I appreciate all of you dialing in, and hopefully this was a useful lesson when thinking about involving our kids more in the kitchen and hopefully increasing their buy-in to eating new or unfamiliar foods. And it does look like the survey link was shared in the chat box, so hopefully all of you can see that. It's the Share Our Strength link that Candace just sent out.
Macy, we have one of our members in the audience, Elise, said thank you. Very informative.
Oh, good. Thank you so much for joining the call. And thank you to everyone, of course. I'm happy that we could find this time to connect virtually. I know it's been a change doing virtual lessons, but glad to hear it was still helpful. And don't forget to download the 2 handouts that are attached to the webinar panel, just as they have other interesting recipes that are great at home, and then also just more tips in the kitchen, especially when we're involving our kids.
We will also send out the handouts via email, just in case anybody encountered difficulties downloading.
Perfect. And that's it for the lesson. So if you have taken the survey, or if you're about to take it, or saving the link for later, it really should only take a few minutes, but that is it on my end from the lesson. So thank you guys again. If you do have questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask, but if you've got to go, or you have something coming up, that is the end of the lesson too.
Looks like we are no other questions.
Perfect. Well, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. Appreciate you doing the survey as well. And I hope everyone has a nice rest of your week.
Thank you.